A group of young bikers surrounded an old man at a roadside diner, their laughter cutting through the evening air like broken glass. One of them, barely 25 with a skull bandana and fresh leather, pointed at the worn patch on the old man's faded red jacket. "Nice patch, Grandpa," he sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. The old man, white hair and beard catching the last rays of sunlight, his sad eyes fixed on his coffee cup, said nothing. Just sat there in his plain t-shirt under that red jacket, that serious expression never changing. The other bikers joined in, their voices rising. "Where'd you get that? A thrift store? You even know what that means, old-timer?" The patch was worn, the edges frayed, but the symbol was clear to anyone who truly understood. The old man's weathered hand stayed wrapped around his mug. He didn't look up, didn't defend himself, just sat there with that same sad, serious expression he always wore. His name was Frank Morrison, 70 years old, living alone in a small apartment above a hardware store in a town that had mostly forgotten him. Every morning he'd walk to the same diner, order the same black coffee, sit at the same corner booth. People saw him as just another old man, invisible, irrelevant. The red jacket was always on his shoulders, winter or summer, that plain t-shirt underneath, his white hair and beard neatly trimmed but simple. His face carried that perpetual sadness, that seriousness that made younger folks uncomfortable. They'd look away when he passed, crossed the street. He never complained, never spoke of the past, just lived his quiet life, paying his bills on time, helping Mrs. Chen carry her groceries, fixing broken hinges for the landlord without being asked. The young bikers had rolled into town that afternoon, their chrome gleaming, their engines roaring, their leather new and stiff. They represented a local motorcycle club, newer generation, more about the image than anything else. They wore their patches with pride but didn't understand the weight of what they represented. To them, it was rebellion, freedom, a way to look tough. They'd seen Frank walk into the diner and immediately dismissed him. Just another old man taking up space. When they noticed the patch on his jacket, they saw it as an insult, a fake, something bought online to pretend. They didn't recognize the authenticity in the worn threads, the faded colours that came from decades of wear, not weeks. The leader of the young group, a kid named Tyler with more attitude than sense, leaned closer to Frank's table. "Seriously, Pops, you shouldn't wear something you didn't earn. That's disrespectful. People died for those colours." Frank's fingers tightened slightly around his mug, but his expression didn't change. That same sad, serious face, that same silence. Tyler's friends laughed louder, emboldened. One of them pulled out his phone, started recording. "This is going on social media, old man. Everyone's going to see you're a fake." The diner had gone quiet. Other customers watched nervously. The waitress, a young woman named Sarah, looked torn between intervening and staying safe. Frank finally looked up, his eyes meeting Tyler's for just a moment. Those eyes held something the young man couldn't quite place, something deep, something that should have warned him. But Tyler was too caught up in his performance. Frank spoke then, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. "I earned it." 3 words, simple, direct. But they carried weight Tyler couldn't hear. The young biker laughed, throwing his head back. "Sure you did, Grandpa. What did you do? Ride a Schwinn in the 60s? His friends roared with laughter. Frank returned to his coffee. Didn't argue, didn't explain. Just sat there in that red jacket, that plain t-shirt underneath, his white hair and beard framing that sad, serious face. The mockery continued for another few minutes. The young bikers were just getting warmed up, their voices getting louder, their jokes getting crueler. Then the door to the diner opened. The change in atmosphere was immediate. The young bikers turned, their laughter dying in their throats. A man in his 50s stepped inside, his leather jacket covered in patches that even Tyler recognized. Real patches. Earned patches. Behind him came 3 more riders, all older, all carrying themselves with the kind of presence that can't be faked. The man in front was Marcus Webb, president of the Iron Cross Motorcycle Club, a legitimate organisation that had been around for 40 years. His club had chapters in 6 states. His word carried weight in communities across the region. His eyes swept the diner, taking in the scene, the young bikers standing around an old man, the phones out, the mockery frozen on their faces. Marcus's gaze fell on Frank, specifically on that worn patch on his red jacket. His face went white. completely white, like he'd seen a ghost. He crossed the diner in 4 long strides, his boots heavy on the worn linoleum. The young bikers stepped back instinctively, suddenly aware they'd miscalculated something. Marcus stopped in front of Frank's table. The old man looked up slowly, that sad expression unchanging. Marcus's hand came up, not in aggression, but in a salute. A crisp, military salute held with absolute respect. The 3 riders behind him did the same. The diner held its breath. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice shaking slightly, "I didn't know you were in town. I would have come sooner." Frank gave the smallest nod, acknowledging but not encouraging. Marcus turned to Tyler and his friends, his face transforming from respect to fury in an instant. "Do you know who this man is? Do you have any idea what that patch means?" Tyler stammered, suddenly looking much younger than his 25 years. We thought... Marcus cut him off. "You thought wrong. This man is Frank Morrison. That patch he's wearing? It's from the Devil's Own, one of the most respected motorcycle clubs in American history. They disbanded in 1978, but not before they became legends. And Frank Morrison wasn't just a member, he was their road captain for 15 years. The young bikers looked confused. Tyler found his voice. So what? He was in some old biker club, that doesn't... Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to something dangerous. The Devil's Own weren't just a motorcycle club, they were veterans. Vietnam veterans who came home to a country that spit on them. They rode together because no one else understood what they'd been through. They protected each other when the government forgot about them. They built communities when society rejected them. Frank Morrison served 2 tours in Vietnam. 2 tours. He was a Marine, decorated. He came home to protesters calling him a baby killer. He came home to a VA that couldn't help him. And he found brothers in the Devil's Own who could. Marcus turned back to Frank, his voice softening. "The stories about you are legendary, sir. The ride to Washington in '73, the veteran outreach programs, the families you helped when their soldiers didn't come home. You and your brothers did more for returning vets than the government ever did." Frank's expression remained sad, serious, but something flickered in his eyes. Memory, pain, pride. "That was a long time ago," he said quietly. Marcus shook his head. "Respect doesn't have an expiration date, sir. What you did matters. What you are matters." Tyler and his friends stood frozen, the weight of their mistake crushing down on them. Marcus wasn't done with them. He pointed at Tyler's patch. "You wear those colours, but you don't understand them. You think it's about looking tough, about the bike you ride. It's about brotherhood. It's about having someone's back when the world turns against them. It's about earning respect through action, not demanding it through intimidation. You just mocked a man who embodies everything your patch is supposed to represent." Tyler's face had gone red, then white. "I didn't know," he whispered. Marcus's voice was steel. "That's the problem. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You saw an old man and assumed he was nothing. You saw a worn patch and assumed it was fake. You judged him by his age, his appearance, his silence. You never considered that maybe, just maybe, he'd earned the right to that silence." One of Marcus's riders, a man named Jimmy with silver in his beard, stepped forward. "I met Frank Morrison once," he said, his voice reverent. "I was 19, just back from Desert Storm, couldn't sleep, couldn't work, couldn't function. I was at a VA meeting, about to walk out, about to give up. Frank was there. He didn't know me anything. But he sat with me for 3 hours, told me his story, told me it gets better but different, told me I wasn't alone. He gave me his number, told me to call any time, day or night. I called that number probably 50 times over the next year. He answered every single time, never complained, never judged, just listened. Saved my life." Jimmy's voice broke slightly. "I tried to thank him years later, tried to find him to tell him what he'd meant. But he'd moved on, disappeared into a quiet life. And here he is, still wearing that jacket, still carrying those memories, still being who he's always been. And you mocked him." The diner remained silent. Sarah, the waitress, had tears streaming down her face. Other customers were wiping their eyes. Tyler looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him. Frank finally stood, his movements slow, the weight of 70 years and a lifetime of memories in every motion. He faced Tyler directly, that sad, serious expression never changing. "You're young," he said quietly. "You don't know what you don't know, but you can learn. Respect isn't about age or patches or how loud your bike is. It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone you meet. It's about understanding that everyone has a story, and most of those stories involve more pain and courage than you can imagine. I don't need your apology. I need you to be better." Tyler's voice came out broken. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was stupid. Frank raised a hand, stopping him. "Show me you're sorry by changing, by thinking before you judge, by understanding that the patch you wear means you're supposed to protect people, not tear them down." Tyler nodded, tears now visible in his eyes. "Yes, sir. I will, sir. I promise." Marcus put a hand on Frank's shoulder. "Sir, would you join us? We're heading to a veterans' memorial dedication 2 towns over. It would be an honor to ride with you." Frank looked at him for a long moment, then shook his head slightly. "I appreciate it, but I ride alone now. Have for years. It's how I prefer it." Marcus nodded, understanding. "If you ever change your mind, you have brothers waiting. Always." Frank placed money on the table for his coffee, more than enough to cover it and leave a generous tip for Sarah. He walked toward the door, that red jacket worn but dignified, that plain t-shirt underneath, his white hair and beard catching the diner's fluorescent lights, his face still carrying that sad, serious expression. At the door he paused, turned back. "Tyler," he said. The young man looked up. "Your bike, the Harley outside with the custom paint." Tyler nodded. "It's beautiful," Frank said. "Take care of it. Ride it with pride. But remember, it's not the bike that makes the rider. It's what you do when you're off it that matters." Then he was gone, walking into the evening, his shadow long against the pavement. Marcus turned to Tyler and his friends, his expression hard. "You're going to make this right. Not with him, because he won't accept it, but with others. You're going to volunteer at the VA. You're going to listen to veteran stories. You're going to learn what service means. And you're going to do it without posting about it on social media, without looking for credit, without expecting praise. You're going to do it because it's right." Tyler nodded, his friends following suit. "Yes, sir, we will." Marcus looked at each of them. The Devil's Own disbanded because most of them are gone now. Vietnam took some, Agent Orange took others, time took the rest. Frank Morrison is one of the last, and you almost made his final years harder because you couldn't see past your own ego. Don't let that happen again. Not to him, not to anyone. The young bikers left the diner quietly, their earlier bravado completely gone. Marcus and his riders followed shortly after, but not before Marcus left a $100 bill on Frank's table with a note. "For the next 100 coffees, sir, with respect." Sarah picked it up, reading it, fresh tears falling. She'd served Frank for 3 years, never knowing, never asking, just seeing a sad old man in a red jacket. Now she understood that sadness was earned, that seriousness was wisdom, that silence was strength. Frank Morrison continued his quiet life in that small town. Still wore his red jacket every day, still had that plain t-shirt underneath, still carried his white hair and beard with dignity, still wore that sad, serious expression. But something changed in how people saw him. Word spread about what happened at the diner, not from gossip but from respect. Tyler kept his promise. He and his friends started volunteering at the VA, started listening, started learning. They saw other Franks there, other quiet men and women carrying invisible weights, wearing their own versions of that red jacket, their own sad expressions hiding stories of courage and sacrifice. One morning, months later, Tyler saw Frank at the diner again. He approached carefully, respectfully. "Sir, could I buy you coffee?" Frank looked up, that same expression, but maybe, just maybe, something softer in his eyes. "You already did," he said quietly. "When you changed, that's payment enough." But Tyler sat anyway, not at Frank's table, but nearby, just present, just respectful. And Frank, for the first time in years, didn't mind the company. Because respect, real respect, doesn't demand attention. It offers presence. It provides space. It honors silence. The patch on Frank's jacket remained worn, the edges frayed, the colors faded. But it was real. Earned through fire and blood and brotherhood. Earned through coming home to a country that didn't want him, and building a life anyway. Earned through helping others when he could barely help himself. Earned through decades of quiet dignity, of showing up, of being present, of never demanding recognition but always deserving it. And now, finally, in a small town diner, over cold coffee and hard-learned lessons, that recognition came. Not with fanfare, not with medals, but with understanding, with respect, with the knowledge that heroes don't always look like we expect. Sometimes they look like a sad old man in a red jacket sitting alone carrying the weight of memories we can't imagine, asking for nothing, deserving everything.